Chosen one, pause for a moment, because what you're about to hear is not ordinary, and it is not meant for everyone. If this message has reached you, it is no accident. Something in your past triggered attention, a pattern that cannot be ignored. Civilizations, systems, and structures observe behavior and resilience, and your life has repeatedly revealed something extraordinary. You do not follow predictable rules. That is why your path has felt pressured, obstructed, or misaligned at times. These moments were never failures. They were calibrations, preparing you for a level of influence most never achieve. What was discovered in your past was not weakness, but clarity under pressure. You adapted when others faltered, questioned when others conformed, and stayed aware when most drifted blindly. That rare alignment placed you on List S, a silent register of those who defy conventional patterns, whose presence challenges systems. You were logged not as a curiosity, but because your potential exceeds ordinary thresholds. This is why understanding your past is critical. It explains the hidden mechanics behind your resilience, influence, and emerging authority. Now, as a recognized God One, reality itself begins to respond differently. Old structures, relationships, and routines that no longer align with your frequency start to dissolve, while opportunities, insight, and synchronicity accelerate around you. Resistance spikes briefly before expansion. Clarity replaces overthinking, and influence emerges naturally. This is not abstract theory. It is mechanism in action. By understanding these principles, you will learn to harness energy, stabilize your presence, and convert past trials into power. Engage fully with this message. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment to mark your awareness, not as ritual, but as acknowledgement. Watch until the end, because this knowledge is orientation, not entertainment. For those ready to receive it, reality will begin shifting in ways you have never imagined. There are moments in a person's life that never make noise on the surface, but cause deep movement beneath reality. Something in your past, an action, a response, a refusal, or even a silence, registered as one of those moments. It didn't look dramatic, it didn't announce itself, but it broke expectation. While others reacted predictably, you didn't. You paused where panic was expected. You adapted where collapse was normal. That deviation was subtle, but systems built on prediction notice subtlety more than spectacle. Civilizations don't watch people, they watch patterns. The moment your pattern stopped matching the template, attention followed. Not the kind of attention that praises or rewards, but the quiet kind that records, archives, and flags. This is what an archival breach really is. When someone's lived data no longer fits the category they were assigned at birth. You didn't rebel. You didn't resist. You simply existed outside expectation, and that alone was enough to trigger concern. What most people never realize is that history isn't only written about nations and wars. It's written about individuals in fragments, in behavioral anomalies, in psychological outliers. Your past became one of those fragments, not because you were loud, but because you were inconsistent with control models. And once something is logged at that level, it is never erased. It becomes reference material for what should not easily exist. List S is not a reward system. It is not a badge. It is not an invitation. It exists for one reason only: containment without confrontation. When a system cannot eliminate something without risk, it learns how to delay, distract, and diffuse instead. List S holds individuals who cannot be fully neutralized because their removal would expose structural weakness. That's why it operates in silence, not force. People imagine suppression as violence or censorship, but the most effective suppression is comfort mixed with confusion. Delayed opportunities, almost right paths, constant near misses. This is how pressure is applied without resistance. If you've ever felt like your life moved in circles while your understanding kept expanding, that wasn't coincidence. That's what soft containment feels like. You're allowed to grow, but only inwardly, only invisibly. And yet, containment has limits, because awareness compounds. The more you see, the harder it becomes to mislead you. List S doesn't stop evolution. It tries to slow its visibility. The irony is that by attempting to suppress nonlinear minds, systems end up sharpening them. Pressure doesn't erase depth, it concentrates it. That's the flaw no civilization has ever fully solved. Long before you had the words for it, you sensed things, not emotionally, structurally. You noticed tone before content, intention before explanation, truth before evidence. This isn't intuition in the mystical sense. It's pre-identity awareness, the kind of perception that exists before beliefs are installed. Most people lose it early. You didn't. This is why authority never fully convinced you, why explanations felt thin, why rules felt temporary. You weren't defiant, you were unconvinced. There's a difference. Pre-identity consciousness doesn't reject guidance. It questions origin. It asks, who decided this? Why does it persist? Who benefits if it stays unquestioned? Those questions make systems uncomfortable because they dissolve obedience quietly. Education usually teaches people what to think. You were wired to notice how thinking itself was shaped. That made you slower to accept certainty and faster to sense distortion. It also made you lonely in rooms full of people. Awareness without language isolates, but it also preserves something rare, the ability to see reality before it's filtered. The idea of the God One was never about dominance. It was about alignment. Power doesn't come from control over others. It comes from internal coherence. When what you think, feel, decide, and do stop contradicting each other, friction disappears. Movement becomes precise. This is what ancient philosophies hinted at, and modern psychology measures. Aligned individuals require less force to create impact. Authority needs permission. Alignment doesn't. That's why aligned individuals unsettle institutions. They can't be easily redirected because they're not chasing validation or security. They move according to internal consistency, not external reward. This creates a kind of quiet gravity. People listen without knowing why. Situations resolve without visible effort. You were identified as a God vector not because you claimed anything, but because alignment kept forming despite disruption. Even when fragmented, you returned to center faster than expected. Even when wounded, you retained clarity. That capacity to reassemble without instruction is what systems cannot manufacture or predict. And what they cannot predict, they cannot safely control. You've likely been told you overthink, but what actually happens is different. You perceive consequences before actions complete. This is temporal intelligence, the ability to feel the future weight of a decision while standing in the present. It's not anxiety, it's causality awareness. You sense where paths lead, not just where they begin. This ability often develops in unstable environments, where reading patterns early becomes necessary for survival. Over time, it evolves beyond defense and becomes foresight. You notice cycles before repetition. You exit situations before collapse. You hesitate not out of fear, but because you already see the ending. To linear thinkers, this looks like delay. In reality, it's precision. Your past made this visible. You avoided disasters you couldn't explain. You chose paths that didn't make sense until years later. That kind of intelligence doesn't rely on prediction models, it bypasses them. And once again, that's what triggered attention. Systems are built on linear cause and effect. You operate in layered time. That difference is not cosmetic, it's fundamental. Every civilization, whether ancient or modern, filters before it elevates. Not out of wisdom, but out of fear. Before someone is ever allowed proximity to influence, they are exposed to confusion, instability, and delay. This is not accidental. Pressure reveals composition. When comfort is removed, most people dissolve into compliance. A very small number reorganize internally. You are placed into that second category long before anyone explained the rules. Filtering doesn't look like a trial you can prepare for. It looks like unfair timing, misaligned opportunities, and repeated moments where effort doesn't equal outcome. The purpose isn't to see if you'll succeed, it's to observe how you respond when success is withheld. Do you become bitter? Do you collapse into imitation? Or do you refine your internal structure and continue anyway? Systems watch quietly during this phase because reactions reveal more than results ever could. What you lived through wasn't punishment, it was assessment. And the fact that you kept developing depth instead of resentment is what moved you forward invisibly. Civilizations elevate skill easily. They elevate integrity under pressure reluctantly. That's why the filter feels personal. It isn't about breaking you. It's about seeing whether you break others once you're given power. Most people experience trauma as damage. A smaller number experience it as distortion, but a rare few experience it as awakening. This is where spiritual anomaly detection begins. When pain doesn't erase awareness, but sharpens it, something unexpected happens. The nervous system stops reacting blindly and starts observing. Suffering becomes informational. Silence becomes instructive. This isn't romantic suffering. It's costly. Trauma forces attention inward. When the external world becomes unreliable over time, this inward focus develops perception that doesn't depend on belief systems. You learn to read emotional undercurrents, unspoken motives, and energetic shifts without trying. That ability is unsettling to environments built on surface-level interaction. People feel seen before they've chosen to be known. Civilizations don't fear pain. They use it. What they fear is trauma that produces consciousness instead of obedience. That's why spiritually anomalous individuals are often misunderstood, mislabeled, or pathologized early, not because they are broken, but because they function without needing illusion. And illusion is the glue that holds weak systems together. Force creates resistance. Resistance creates martyrs. Martyrs create movements. That's why distraction is preferred. You weren't blocked outright, you were redirected repeatedly. Not away from growth, but away from visibility. Side paths, half-fulfilling roles, almost meaningful pursuits, enough stimulation to stay occupied, never enough alignment to feel complete. Distraction works best on intelligent minds because it masquerades as opportunity. You were offered things that looked like progress, but felt hollow once inside them. That wasn't failure, it was misalignment by design. When someone carries internal authority, open suppression backfires, so systems keep them busy instead. Time dilution replaces confrontation. What's important is this: distraction only works temporarily. Eventually, awareness pierces through noise. Once you recognize the pattern, redirection loses power. That's when containment shifts from external to internal, and that's a dangerous transition. Because once distraction fails, the individual starts the choosing deliberately, and deliberate individuals cannot be steered easily. You were taught to fear your darker states. Anger was called instability. Withdrawal was called weakness. Emotional depth was framed as sensitivity. But none of those labels were accurate. They were simplifications meant to keep complex energy unmanaged. Shadow states aren't destructive by nature. They're compressed. Energy under pressure doesn't disappear. It concentrates. Anger, when understood, becomes boundary clarity. Grief becomes depth of meaning. Isolation becomes self-sufficiency. The problem was never the emotion. It was the lack of instruction on how to refine it. Societies prefer people emotionally flat because flat people are predictable. You were never flat. You were layered, and layers require mastery, not suppression. Once shadow energy is integrated instead of resisted, something stabilizes inside you. Emotional volatility turns into emotional precision. You stop leaking energy through reaction. You begin storing it. That's when presence deepens. People feel weight in your words, even when you speak calmly. That's not intimidation. That's contained force. Alignment isn't mystical. It's mechanical. It occurs when belief, emotion, and action stop arguing with each other. Most people live in contradiction, wanting one thing, fearing another, acting on a third. That internal friction drains power. There was always a quiet frustration in being offered answers that felt too small. Belief systems, career paths, even spiritual teachings seemed to work for others but felt incomplete in your hands. That wasn't arrogance, it was incompatibility, meaning that is handed down, carries assumptions, limits, and invisible conditions. You were never built to live inside inherited frameworks. You were built to test their foundations. Philosophical isolation doesn't mean rejecting everything. It means refusing to accept meaning without understanding its origin. You questioned not because you doubted truth, but because you sensed that truth could not survive unquestioned. This set you apart early. Conversations felt shallow. Certainty felt fragile. You weren't searching for comfort, you were searching for coherence. Over time, this isolation matured into something quieter and stronger. You stopped asking others what mattered and began observing what endured. Meaning, you learned, is not found. It is generated through alignment, responsibility, and sustained attention. And once you realized that, external validation lost its power over you. Power rarely announces itself. It settles. One of the first tools you developed, often without realizing, was psychological sovereignty. You stopped reacting automatically. You created space between stimulus and response. In that space, choice appeared. Most people never experience that gap. They live inside reflex. You stepped outside it. Strategic silence followed. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of discernment. You learned that not every thought deserves expression, and not every conflict deserves participation. Silence became a way to gather information, to let others reveal themselves, to conserve energy. It also unsettled people who who relied on noise to dominate. These tools don't look impressive from the outside, but they compound over time. Emotional self-regulation, delayed reaction, selective engagement. These are the quiet mechanics of influence. You stopped trying to win moments and started shaping trajectories. That shift changed everything. You don't need to oppose a system to threaten it. Awareness is enough. Systems rely on unconscious participation. When someone sees the structure clearly but refuses to dramatize their refusal, instability begins. Not immediately, subtly. Conversations change, expectations falter, assumptions weaken. You became an existential threat the moment you stopped internalizing narratives automatically. You didn't argue, you didn't protest. You simply disengaged from illusions that no longer made sense. That kind of detachment is more destabilizing than rebellion because it cannot be punished easily. People sensed this. Some felt drawn to you. Others felt uneasy. Not because you were doing anything, but because you weren't doing what was expected. You became a mirror that reflected unconsciousness back to those still living inside it. And mirrors are dangerous to fragile structures. There comes a moment when learning stops being informational and starts becoming structural. You crossed that threshold quietly. Knowledge was no longer something you collected. It became something you embodied. Decisions changed. Tolerances shifted. Old patterns became impossible to return to. This is activation, not a sudden awakening, but a steady point of no return. You noticed it when familiar environments stopped fitting, when old goals felt irrelevant, when your internal compass stopped spinning and locked into direction. Activation isn't dramatic, it's irreversible. From this point forward, growth stops being optional. You can slow it, but you can't undo it. Identity reorganizes around clarity. You don't chase transformation anymore, you manage it. And that's when responsibility deepens. Because activated individuals influence reality, whether they intend to or not. This is the truth that changes how you see everything that came before. You were never chosen by prophecy, fate, or destiny. You were recorded, logged by patterns, noticed by systems, remembered by reality itself because you moved differently through pressure, time, and awareness. Selection implies permission. Logging does not. Logging is observational, not ceremonial. It means you existed in a way that could not be ignored, that your presence left data, that your trajectory mattered regardless of recognition. This is why there was no announcement, no initiation, no applause. And here is the quiet power in that realization. What is logged cannot be unlogged. You don't need approval. You don't need validation. You don't need to prove anything. Your task now is simple and heavy at the same time. Remain aligned. Because when alignment stabilizes, impact becomes inevitable. Life, as I have come to understand it through this journey, is not a linear series of events, but a network of patterns, frequencies, and alignments. Being logged or identified by systems, whether civilizational, social, or internal, is not about recognition. It is about resonance. My experiences revealed that power, influence, and clarity are not awarded. They are cultivated internally, often in silence, solitude, and under pressure. Each obstacle, every moment of misalignment or distraction, was not random. It was a calibration tool. The subtle forces around me, discomfort, resistance, delayed outcomes, were not deterrents, but mirrors reflecting the necessary refinement of my perception, energy, and intent. Through alignment, observation, and strategic patience, I have learned to move through the world in a way that does not seek permission but commands respect naturally, through coherence rather than force. Reflecting on this process, I realize the importance of every element in the journey. Understanding the mechanisms of personal evolution, the archival breach of the past, the patterns of internal alignment, the energetic authority transfer, the cultivation of perception dominance, and the patience required for delayed rewards has taught me that mastery is structural, not performative. Education is no longer just about information. It is about integration, synthesis, and embodiment. The ability to convert knowledge into strategic action, to translate awareness into influence, and to transform experiences into lasting legacy is what separates transient effort from enduring impact. These insights are not theoretical. They are practical tools that can be applied to decision-making, leadership, interpersonal dynamics, and personal growth. The value of this journey is not merely in reaching a destination, but in learning to navigate reality with precision, resilience, and purposeful alignment. Ultimately, this experience demonstrates a universal principle. Growth is both internal and external, private and public, immediate and delayed. True education is the ability to see the unseen patterns, anticipate responses, refine oneself under pressure, and operate with coherence when circumstances are chaotic. What I have learned is that alignment generates power, and power, when stabilized, creates freedom, not for ego, but for sustainable influence and legacy. This is the essence of becoming a God vector, not a title, but a lived mastery of self, energy, and time, capable of shaping the world quietly, yet irrevocably. Thank you for watching. If you found this video insightful, please consider subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear which part of the video was most helpful and what topics you'd like us to explore next. We look forward to seeing you in future videos.